Memorizing solubility rules can be difficult, so in this video I'm going to give you helpful tips in order to remember the solubility rules easily. So let's start with rule 1. Compounds that contain these ions are always soluble in aqueous solutions. And a way to remember this rule is to remember the word NAG SAG, where N stands for the nitrate ion, the A stands for the acetate, the CH3COO minus, the G stands for the group 1 alkali metal ions, and by this I mean group 1 like Li plus, Na plus, K plus, Rb plus, cesium, rubidium, and cesium. And sometimes I would like to call them the Lena-Krypsis group, the Lena-Krypsis group ions, which are the group 1 ions, to remember the ions in group 1. And we also, the S stands for the sulfate ion, the A stands for the ammonium ion, and this G also stands for group 7, which are the ions I minus, Cl minus, and Br minus only of group 7. Now, as you can see, I placed a circle over here because sulfate can be insoluble with ions of rule 2 that we are going to cover now. And these ions are also going to be insoluble with the ions of rule 2. But before we go there, for example, I want to give certain examples. Any compound that contains the nitrate ion is going to be soluble. For example, MgNO32, or let's say NaNO3. This is definitely going to be soluble. Anything with Ca3COO minus is going to be soluble. Let's say, for example, I have Na sodium acetate, then this is definitely going to be soluble. Any cation from the alkali metal ions, let's say LiCl, NaBr, NaI, Ki, then these are definitely going to be soluble. The NH4 plus, for example, NH4Cl is definitely soluble. So these ions are always soluble with anything. Now, the sulfates are soluble most of the time except with ions of rule 2, and the group 7 are insoluble with the ions of rule 2. Now, rule 2, the sulfate and the group 7 ions that we mentioned in rule 1 are insoluble with these ions. So the sulfate is insoluble with these ions, and I would like to call them the Castrobarl because Ca stands for the calcium, the Stro stands for the strontium, then you have Ba, barium, the barium ion, and the L over here stands for the lead ion. This is how you can remember that the sulfates are insoluble with these ions. Now, the group 7 ions are insoluble with the LCS, and by LCS I mean the lead ion, Pb2+, the copper 1 ion, and the silver. Now, I also want you to remember that it's Cu plus and not Cu2 plus most of the time. Now, rule number 3, compounds that contain these ions are insoluble in aqueous solution. However, they are soluble when they pair with these ions. So these ions are insoluble with cations most of the time. However, if they pair up with the ions of this column, then they're going to be soluble. So OH minus with any alkali metal ion like Li plus, Na plus, and so on, any Lena-Krypsis ion of group 1, with the NH4 plus ion, with Sr2 plus ion, or with a Ba2 plus, the barium ion, then it is soluble. The CO3 2 minus is soluble also with all the alkali metal ions except for Li plus. So I just want to mention that Li 2 CO3 has a low solubility, but with the other ions, let's say Na2CO3, sodium carbonate, or potassium and so on, then it's going to be soluble. With NH4 plus, it is also soluble. So NH4, for example, 2CO3, then this is soluble. Now, if we go to the phosphate ion and to the sulfide, the phosphate, and the oxide ion, now these three ions are only soluble with the alkali ions and the NH4 plus. So for these, you just have to know that they're soluble with the alkali. I forgot to put over here alkali metal ions, and the NH4 plus, they're always soluble. For the sulfide ion, it is only soluble with the alkali metal ions, NH4 plus, and in addition, it's also soluble with the magnesium ion, the Ca2 plus, the Sr2 plus, the Ba2 plus, and the Be2 plus. So as you can see, all of these ions are soluble with the alkali metal ions and the NH4 plus. Now, sometimes we have additional ions that are soluble for the OH minus, and we have about like two or let's say about four ions or five ions that are also soluble with additional with the sulfide ion.